Back in 1999, I came across a game that, despite its obvious technical limitations, felt way ahead of its time. The idea of building your own team, catching, collecting, training, and battling with Pokémon was something unique, almost revolutionary. But as the years went by, what once felt like innovation turned into repetition, and what used to be cutting edge slowly fell behind. As gaming consoles evolved and opened doors to a world of new mechanics, gameplay possibilities, storytelling techniques, and technical advancements, the mainline Pokémon series didn't keep up. It stayed stuck to limited hardware, and worse, stopped taking risks. The formula was kept almost intact, even when there were clear opportunities to improve it. Don't get me wrong, the games are still fun and undeniably charming, but there's this constant feeling that the franchise chose not to push further, like someone who finds a single fruit tree and decides to ignore the rest of the orchard. That's why in this video, we're going to suggest a few changes that could breathe new life into the mainline Pokémon experience. The suggestions will be split into two parts. In this first episode, we'll focus on everything outside of battles. In the second, we'll dive into combat mechanics, including a much bolder proposal: what if it's time to ditch the classic turn-based system altogether? Pokémon. The first problem with the franchise lies in the Pokémon themselves. Let's start with the obvious. Some creatures just don't make logical sense. Take Onix, for example, a giant stone snake that visually demands respect, but in practice is borderline useless. Its stats are completely unbalanced, it has barely relevant abilities, and its move pool is painfully shallow. And Onix is far from an isolated case. There are plenty of Pokémon with strong visual or thematic concepts that completely fall flat in battle. Speaking of stats, the inconsistencies can be outright laughable. It's not uncommon to see average Pokémon with specific stats that surpass literal legends of the Pokémon universe. There are countless videos out there highlighting these bizarre imbalances. Duosion, for example, has absolutely no business having more special attack than Arceus. That breaks the internal logic of the game and undermines the whole idea of a power hierarchy among Pokémon. Another critical point is how wildly unbalanced some Pokémon are. Of course, no one expects a Caterpie to beat a Mewtwo, but the issue goes deeper than that. Certain combinations of stats, abilities, and moves result in competitive monsters that dominate the metagame with little to no effort. Sure, balance gets tweaked from time to time, but a lot of these problems could be addressed more permanently with structural adjustments, some of which we'll be suggesting throughout this video. And finally, maybe the most subjective point, but one that definitely matters. The design and purpose of new Pokémon are getting lost in a mix of excess and lack of direction. It used to take just one look to understand the inspiration behind a Pokémon. There was visual clarity, thematic consistency. Today, many of the new ones feel like the result of rushed brainstorms, where the rule is throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. The result? Over-designed visuals, cluttered with lines, unnecessary details, and elements that confuse more than they communicate. The starters still try to preserve some identity, but the legendaries and mythicals, they've become the peak of an aesthetic and conceptual mess that keeps getting worse, dragging the rest of the roster into a pool of incoherence, not just visually, but existentially. We're talking about creatures whose origin, purpose, and place in the Pokémon universe feel completely disconnected. They look more like startup logos than living beings. Call me nostalgic if you want, and yes, I know there were questionable designs in the past too, but at least there was logic. I can tell Zapdos is an electric bird. Miraidon and Koraidon? Honestly, to this day, I have no idea what they're supposed to be. And while we're at it, it's about time to stop blindly stacking new Pokémon onto the pile. Work better with the ones you already have, or if you're going to add more, make sure they're few, but with a clear identity and solid creative direction. Type balance. This suggestion could easily belong in the video about the battle system, but it ties directly into the imbalance we've already talked about. Some types are naturally seen as weaker, whether it's because they have too many weaknesses, because there are tons of strong moves from types that counter them, because there are very few good Pokémon of that type, or because they're just not super effective against anything relevant. And on top of all that, some types suffer from a serious lack of good moves, and when those strong moves do exist, they're often locked behind a handful of specific species. Take the bug type, for example. It gets wrecked by several other types, all of which have a wide variety of solid moves. It barely has any truly viable Pokémon, it's not very effective against a lot of types, and it lacks a proper set of impactful and widely available moves. And here's the thing, the solution isn't just give it more 90 base power attacks. Bug, by nature, leans toward utility and support moves, so the ideal fix would be to make those kinds of moves more consistent and impactful. Sure, giving it a few new high power moves wouldn't hurt, but the real priority should be strengthening the type's identity through stat-altering, condition-inflicting, and strategy-enabling attacks that actually matter in battle. In addition to improving the available moves, another key piece to fixing this imbalance is simply creating better Pokémon within those underpowered types. Having more viable options with solid stats, relevant abilities, and movesets that actually align with the type's intended role can completely change the competitive landscape. Bug, for instance, can't keep relying on just Heracross and Volcarona to carry the entire type. Types only become real threats when they have well-rounded representatives that can execute diverse strategies and make an actual impact in battle. Designing strong and versatile Pokémon for these weaker types not only boosts their presence in the meta, but also helps them stand on their own, instead of relying on niche conditions to be effective. This also helps address a problem that shows up on the opposite side of the imbalance. Some Pokémon types have only 2 or 3 weaknesses, and even those can be nullified or reduced through secondary types or abilities, sometimes to the point where their only real threat is from a weak type like Bug. That's like playing chess where the king can only be taken by a single piece, and if that piece is useless, you've got a broken system. Empowering underused types fixes that, and it opens the door to more varied and interesting strategies in the game. Learning moves. This one's more straightforward. The move learning system in Pokémon is painfully rigid. Sure, over time we got tutor moves and breeding moves, but even those feel like minor additions rather than true depth to the mechanic. The point here isn't to replace what already exists, it's to expand it. Imagine a system where Pokémon can learn moves by watching others perform them, with a probability tied to the learning, or Pokémon that unlock new moves after completing specific challenges. Training-based learning could also be part of it, requiring a sequence of battles or certain milestones to access an exclusive move. You could even tie certain moves to stat combinations, rewarding different training styles and strategic builds. There are tons of creative options. What absolutely doesn't work anymore is sticking with the same old format. Level up, open the list, and pick one of 4. That system has clearly hit its limit. It could be so much more dynamic, immersive, and rewarding. Caretaking. Here's a suggestion that might be a bit controversial. Adding caretaking elements to the way we raise Pokémon. And yes, it gets even more divisive when I bring up Digimon World as a reference. This isn't about copying everything Digimon World does, nor limiting ourselves to its exact mechanics, but rather about showing how certain elements can add real depth to the gameplay. Just 3 basic conditions from that game, hunger, fatigue, and happiness, could already bring a lot of variety to Pokémon, and introduce new layers to both battles and resource management. Imagine Pokémon performing worse in battle if they're hungry or tired, or becoming more aggressive and less obedient if their happiness drops too low. Feeding could be handled through items or by visiting specific places like restaurants or NPC homes. And food could have effects beyond just restoring energy. It could affect happiness, provide temporary or permanent stat boosts, grant resistance to certain types or status effects, or even lead to negative consequences like sluggishness or visible weight gain from overeating. Fatigue could come from walking too much without rest, from back-to-back battles, from staying too long in the active team without returning to the lab, from harsh environments, low HP over extended periods, or frequent use of heavy-hitting moves. You could even split fatigue into short-term and long-term levels, each with distinct effects and recovery methods. Happiness, in turn, could be influenced by just about everything. A competitive Pokémon might become happier from battling more, but keeping it hungry or exhausted would obviously hurt that happiness. Environmental elements could play a role too. Bringing a rock type into a cave could raise its mood, while dragging a fire type into the ocean might gradually bring it down. Now sure, happiness already exists as a mechanic in the games, but the idea here is to deepen it and make it multifaceted. These are just 3 core ideas, but the potential for expansion is nearly endless. It's an extra layer of immersion that could completely reshape how players connect with their Pokémon. More than just building a dynamic system, this proposal is also about bringing back a feeling that the anime has always delivered so well, but that the games have rarely explored in a meaningful way. The feeling of actually taking care of your Pokémon, It's not just about training or battling, it's about building a bond, understanding what your Pokémon needs, and seeing how your choices affect its well-being. That emotional depth has always been present in the anime's storytelling, but in the games, it's barely scratched the surface. Training. Training Pokémon in the games has always been synonymous with grind. Whether it's the straightforward XP grind or the slightly more strategic EV manipulation, it's always felt like a repetitive chore. This proposal, much like the one for Caretaking, is about bringing back elements that the anime constantly emphasizes, but the games have largely ignored. And the idea is simple, but packed with potential. Create a more dynamic and engaging way to develop stats, levels, moves, and even evolutions. The concept is to mix specialized training in gyms, training centers, skill and knowledge trials, various challenges, and competitions with the traditional battles, personal achievements, team victories, gym leader duels, and, of course, the Elite Four. These training activities could be accessed through points earned by each Pokémon, item exchanges, or even in-game currency. Challenges and competitions could reward you with temporary or permanent bonuses, stat boosts, new abilities, level ups, move learning, or even triggering evolution. The battles and accomplishments of each Pokémon, both individually and as part of a team, could work similarly to EVs, but in a more organic and contextual way. No more needing to defeat 255 Weedles just to boost speed. Instead, each battle would contribute differently to a Pokémon's growth, depending on its context, importance, and outcome. A tough, hard-fought match against a gym leader should impact a Pokémon's development far more than a random wild encounter on Route 22. Not just because of the difficulty, but because of the symbolic weight and the experience gained. That's what would make the training process actually meaningful. Each type of training would influence how a Pokémon develops its stats, learns moves, or reaches evolution conditions. Growth limitations could be applied directly, like stat-specific caps or Pokémon-specific growth curves, similar to the EV system, or indirectly, through mechanics like progressive difficulty, diminishing returns, or even links with the caretaking system mentioned earlier. New moves could be learned through training, or in a more creative approach, existing moves could be enhanced. More PP, extra power, or added effects. Finally, evolution conditions could also be tied to these training sessions, working alongside the traditional methods. The goal here isn't to erase what's already been built, it's to add depth and make training something more meaningful, more personal, and above all, more fun. Evolutions. Speaking of evolution, the idea here is, once again, to bring in variety. The games remain stuck in a narrow set of linear, straightforward mechanics that turn evolution into something overly mechanical and repetitive. And that's a waste, because evolving a Pokémon should feel like the peak of its growth, the reward for all your effort, not just the result of stacking XP using a stone or initiating a trade. What we're proposing is a break from that predictability. Evolution could be tied to a wide range of conditions, like winning a certain number of battles, defeating stronger or type-advantaged opponents, hitting specific stat combinations, going through unique experiences, or even including a small degree of randomness. All of that would give each evolution more personality and meaning. But the real potential of this idea becomes clear when it ties into the training and caretaking systems we've already discussed. Together, these three layers form the core of what the Pokémon anime has always conveyed so well: taking care of your Pokémon, training it with dedication, and watching it evolve as a natural emotional payoff. That entire dynamic is at the heart of the anime's narrative, and it has almost no equivalent in the games, where evolution is often just a predictable, mechanical formality, stripped of emotion and engagement. Yes, I was genuinely moved the first time my Charmander evolved into Charmeleon. That moment stuck with me. But nowadays, that experience feels like an automatic ritual, one that barely requires involvement and carries no emotional weight. It doesn't come close to what raising a Pokémon should represent. Evolution should reflect your bond, your effort, and the decisions you've made along the journey. And the foundation for this already exists in the previous suggestions: dynamic criteria involving stats, accomplishments, emotional state, fatigue or happiness levels, specific training milestones, and yes, level, because it can still matter. What's important is that evolution shouldn't be based on static triggers alone. It should reflect the path you've taken, not just some arbitrary checkpoint. That way, players stop just watching a XP bar fill up and start actually participating in their Pokemon's journey. Game speed. Okay, no more messing with the core gameplay structure. We don't want the die-hard fans showing up with torches and pitchforks. Let's talk about something more specific, well-targeted, and ridiculously easy to fix. Make the games faster. That's it. Simple as that. No one can take the painfully slow animations of basic attacks anymore, especially during random encounters with the 20th Zubat in some dark, never-ending cave. There's no impact, no surprise, no payoff, just a delay. And the same goes for dialogue. Most NPCs are out here delivering walls of irrelevant small talk, and even when it's part of the main plot, the pacing is so sluggish it feels like the game is actively trying to make you drop the controller. When those conversations start dragging on like stage play monologues, the only button I'm looking for is the one that says, "Wake me up when September ends." Lore. Here we go again with a topic we've already touched on. Stop inventing entirely new stories and creatures every generation. Pokémon lore doesn't need to be endlessly complex or constantly expanding. It just needs to make sense, be fun, creative, explain the origin of a few things, give purpose to the universe, and tie existing stories together in a meaningful way. But no, every generation insists on adding new mythical beings, fresh layers of deep lore, and forced attempts to connect dots that lost coherence ages ago. It's like trying to bake a bigger and bigger loaf of bread using the same amount of dough. What the developers haven't realized is that not only are the holes in the loaf getting larger, but the whole thing has already crumbled into breadcrumbs. Enough metaphors. Piling new explanations on top of old ones doesn't strengthen the story, it just dilutes what was already established. It makes the narrative feel hollow, like even the game doesn't believe in its own universe anymore. It weakens emotional connections with previous generations, creates forced complexity, and pushes players away, because they realize that nothing really matters once the next batch of Pokémon rolls in. And there's more. This endless need to expand the lore leads to clear creative burnout, which directly affects the quality of the Pokémon designs and storytelling themselves. It's not that each new generation outright contradicts the previous one, but it comes dangerously close. When everything is mythical, nothing is. If every generation brings its own pantheon of divine beings and cosmic tales, those elements lose the uniqueness and impact they're supposed to have. And to top it all off, there's still that one big obvious question no game ever bothers to answer. How is it that, in such a connected world, full of researchers and trainers, no one from a newly discovered region has ever set foot in the older ones to bring over their creatures and stories? It's the kind of narrative oversight that only happens when the lore is more concerned with expanding than with actually holding itself together. Plot. If the lore of the Pokémon universe has weakened over time, the same can easily be said about the plot of each game. The narrative structure has become a template, recycled generation after generation. A generic rival, a criminal organization with some scheme involving legendary or mythical Pokémon, 8 gyms to beat, and the Elite Four at the end. Besides being predictable, it's also shallow and uninspired. In the earlier games, this structure worked. There was a sense of mystery, a feeling of progress. It mirrored the anime, and it gave your journey a symbolic climax. But times have changed. The formula is worn out, the stories should have evolved, modern consoles can easily handle richer narratives, and the audience has grown up. What's missing are more complex, varied storylines, ones with more mature human themes. Topics like identity, internal conflict, loss, romance, moral dilemmas, all of these would fit perfectly into a Pokémon game. And no, that doesn't mean abandoning younger audiences. That's the whole beauty of this idea. Not just here, but in almost every suggestion we've made so far. You don't have to throw out the core formula. Just build meaningful variations around it. We can still have the classic games with lighter, more accessible plots, and at the same time, create deeper narrative experiences for those who want something different. Because yes, I'm nostalgic, but I don't want to keep playing just for the memory of fun I used to have. I want new ways to have fun within the same universe. And before someone rushes to the comments accusing me of contradicting myself, criticizing lore expansion while asking for more story, let's be clear. I'm not asking for more explanations about the universe. I'm asking for more thematic variety within it. Completely different things. I don't need another divine Pokémon who created time or the multiverse. I want diverse stories that use the already established world with more depth. In fact, just this topic could fill an entire video. Imagine a Pokémon game where you're part of a war between rival factions of trainers, not as a world-saving hero, but as someone with beliefs, doubts, and real choices. The franchise already has the world, the characters, the reach. All it's missing is the narrative courage to do it. Post-game. This suggestion doesn't apply to every game, and it doesn't require innovation either. The idea here is simple. Just do a better job of expanding what already worked. Battle facilities, revisiting old regions, narrative continuations. These are some of the most beloved types of post-game content among fans. But sadly, not every game seems to have gotten the memo. The quality of post-game content is wildly inconsistent, and often completely ignores what past titles got right. If most of the other suggestions here were about pushing for something new, this one leans on the basics. Repeat what worked, but do it with purpose, not just to artificially inflate the content. It's not about quantity, it's about motivation. Post-game content needs to make sense within the game's universe. It needs to give the player a real reason to keep going. Just dumping a bunch of generic side tasks onto the map doesn't cut it. There still has to be creativity behind it. And while we're on the subject, enough with the DLCs and exclusive events. Come on, you're already rich. You don't need to nickel and dime us. And while you're at it, drop the multiple versions too. 2 or 3 editions per generation? Yeah, we're done with that. New Game Plus. While the previous suggestion was about reusing what already worked within the franchise, this one looks outward and borrows from what many other games already do brilliantly, the classic New Game Plus. The idea is simple and effective. Let players restart the game while keeping some kind of reward or advantage that carries over into the next playthrough. Each time the player finishes the game, especially by hitting certain parameters like time limits, difficulty settings, or specific challenge rules, new rewards would unlock for the next run. That way, replaying the same game stops feeling repetitive and becomes something natural, fun, challenging, and most importantly, rewarding. There's no need to reinvent anything here. Just take a cue from what games like Resident Evil have been doing for years. Pokemon already has the structure for this. All that's missing is the will to actually use it. Meaningful side quests with real rewards. Side quests in Pokemon games are already rare, but what's worse is the quality of the rewards they offer. Common items, a random Pokemon, some recycled move, none of it really motivates exploration or discovery. Most players who bother with the few side quests available probably do it just to hit that 100% completion mark. The suggestion here is simple. Improve the rewards and if possible, improve the side quest content quality itself. Give players something worth chasing. Weak rewards. Speaking of weak rewards, this seems to be a hallmark of the franchise. The anime's classic slogan is catch them all. And what do you actually get for doing it? Nothing. At least in most games. In a few cases, you might get a symbolic reward, like a starter from another generation or some borderline useless item. But generally speaking, the game barely acknowledges the effort you put into doing exactly what it asked you to do. Caught every Pokemon? Congrats, here's a certificate. Beat the Elite Four? Take a picture with your team and move along. Save the world from a criminal organization? Here, have a Master Ball and a thanks. Defeated a gym leader? Back in the day, your Pokemon at least got a stat boost. Now, it's pretty much nothing on top of nothing. Beat your rival over and over? He still acts like he won, calls you lucky, and shows up later like nothing ever happened. It honestly feels like none of your achievements have any real weight in the game world. The Pokemon universe just keeps going, completely indifferent to your efforts, as if catching every single monster, beating every gym, saving the planet, and defeating your rival are just bureaucratic steps in your journey. It gets hard to stay motivated when the game itself doesn't seem to care about your accomplishments in any meaningful way. Difficulty. Here's another quick and straightforward suggestion. Make difficulty levels a standard feature in Pokemon games. This was introduced once and then completely abandoned. Allowing players to choose between easy, normal, or hard should be the bare minimum. It gives players direct control over their experience and respects different playstyles, without forcing everyone into a single pace or one-size-fits-all approach. On top of that, dynamic difficulty should also be considered. It doesn't replace manual difficulty selection, it complements it. Many games have already shown how effective it can be to adjust the challenge based on the player's performance, ramping things up or down without needing to restart or dig through menus. Player-created challenges. Speaking of difficulty, or more accurately, the complete lack of it, many experienced players have taken it upon themselves to create self-imposed limitations just to make Pokemon games truly challenging. And yes, this has actually been incredibly beneficial for the Pokemon community. These challenges have become a pillar of online gameplay content, from the classic Nuzlocke to increasingly creative variants, Playing without using items, never visiting Pokemon centers, only using your starter, or even banning direct damage moves altogether. Some go even further, beating the game with a single type, or using only the team of a specific character from the games or anime. These player-made restrictions add layers upon layers to the gameplay. They force you to think differently, make you use often overlooked tools, lead to team compositions you'd never try otherwise, and above all, they create unique experiences. Personally, I just want a game mode that gives me a reason to use a Tangela. That's it. That's the dream. Because outside of that kind of context, I honestly can't think of a single good reason to put it on my team. These challenge modes introduce a kind of variety that no other game system, mechanical or narrative, can match. The possibilities are endless, and this is something the developers could absolutely embrace officially. They could add alternate game modes, or even build a community feature that lets players create, share, and compete using custom rules, challenge types, leaderboards, and goals. There's already a fan base doing all of this on its own. The least the franchise could do is recognize it and give it the support it deserves. Game Maker. Speaking of embracing the player community, why not take a page from Mario Maker and do the same thing here? The Pokemon franchise has one of the most creative, dedicated fan bases out there, with a long-proven track record of making incredible content on their own. ROM hacks, fan games, custom challenges, alternative rule sets, region redesigns, reimagined gyms, all of that already exists, often made with more care and creativity than what we've seen from the official games in recent years. The idea of a Pokemon Maker isn't far-fetched. In fact, it would be a natural evolution. Let players build their own routes, towns, gym leaders, enemy teams, and even custom battle rules. Imagine designing your own region with a basic storyline, setting which Pokemon appear in each area, and creating unique constraints like only dark types allowed, or you lose a team member after every badge. The possibilities are virtually endless, and the level of community engagement would skyrocket. More than that, a mode like this would give the base game a much longer life. Players could try out campaigns made by others, climb leaderboards, take on custom challenges, and revisit classic ideas through fresh, creative twists. And most importantly, all of this would come with official support, giving stability and visibility to fan-made content. The community already does this stuff on its own. It's time for the franchise to bring it in-house. It might not seem like it, but I truly love Pokemon games. And it's exactly because I want to keep loving this franchise for years to come that I can't afford to get bored with it. But that's what's slowly happening. Honestly, few things were as painful as seeing Pokemon Go launch with the revolutionary idea of catching Pokemon in the real world, only to have one of the dumbest gameplay systems ever. Why couldn't we catch Pokemon in the real world and battle and explore, just like in the classic games? Is that really too much to ask? And that's the exact same feeling I get from the mainline series, like they're delivering far less than they could, just to squeeze every last drop out of a formula that once worked. Sure, they're still commercially successful, the games are still fun, but how long can the franchise hold up under this slow, steady wear before even the most loyal fans start losing interest? So, what do you think? Do you agree with these ideas? Got suggestions of your own? Drop them in the comments, I'll be keeping an eye out. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss part 2, where we'll be diving deep into the Pokemon battle system.